And now you've got yourself something funky.
Hey everybody, thanks so much for checking out this quick video on making cool, funky stuff inside of Mari's node graph. This is going to be another video in the series where I talk about creating your own custom node graph tools called gizmos. If you haven't really heard about what a gizmo is or don't know how it works, please check out episode 1 of the series where I talk about the basics of gizmo creation. You can find the link in the description below. Today we're going to be trying to make a procedural warp node, kind of like if you've used one in Designer, it'll work in a similar way. So a huge advantage of working in the node graph is that you're able to procedurally manipulate the 2D or 3D positions of textures. Some nodes have a UV or position input, and into that we can plug whatever we want. For our little warpy effect, the simple trick is to take some standard UV information with a simple UV node, and we can manipulate that with a noise or a texture of some sort. The noise kind of funkifies up the UV values, giving us the desired effect. Let me show you how it works. Let's start with a texture of some sort. I've got this texture from Substance Source. It's a nice fabric texture, and it's got some perfectly crispy straight lines to the pattern, and I want to add a little bit of waviness to it. Nothing too crazy, just to make it a little less perfect looking, like somebody's wearing it or has worn it in the past. First, what we need to do is grab a UV node, hit tab, type in UV, and boom. If this was a 3D texture, we would use a position node instead, but this is just a 2D texture, so a UV node is all that we need. All this is doing is using default UV values to position the 2D texture. Next, let's grab something to warp our texture with. I'm going to use a purlin noise for a nice soft, warpy, wavy effect. But you can use any noise, image, or procedural texture that you want to use. All we have to do is take our UV and our purlin and combine them together using an add or a multiply or something like that, and boom, you got a warp node. And that's it.
Funky.
Just kidding, it's maybe a tiny bit strong, so we should probably set up some power controls. First, what I want to do is mix the UV and the add node together. Hit tab, type mix, enter, and boom. This way we can blend in how much of the warp we want to use. I'm going to plug in the UV node here, and with mix node, the blend amount 0 equals input A and 1 equals input B. So I'm going to swap these by selecting the node, hitting Shift X, and now it's more like the higher the value, the more warpy the effect is. And that's way closer to what we're looking for, but it's still pretty sensitive. The scale of the mesh changes how much the 3D noise affects the warp, and I really only have values between 0 and 0.1, and anything beyond that is just kind of smeared into oblivion. So let's add a multiplier for finer level of control over the strength of the warp texture. Now, before we get too lost, let me just kind of label everything with some backdrops so that we know what we're doing. All right, so there we go. We've got our warp noise texture. We've got a control for the strength of the texture itself. We've got a control for the overall amount as well. I can play with the size of my warp noise, and then I can knock down the amount to make the effect more subtle. And this works exactly how I want it to, so let's just bundle this up, expose a couple of parameters, and export it. Now, remember, there are two things to keep in mind when exposing parameters for your gizmo. First, the name of the node will be the category the parameter will live under in the gizmo's node properties. Instead of having a multiply and a mix category, I only want a warp category, so I'll name these two as such. The name of the parameter itself can be edited later after you expose it. Second, and very important to note, this little R button here in the node properties, it will reset the parameter to its default value. If I move this slider and hit this button, the value goes back to 0. When you expose a parameter, whatever it's set at when you expose it is what will become the default for your gizmo. You can see if I set the slider to some value and then I expose it, and I come into the main root of the node graph, play with the values, and hit reset, it will go back to that specific value that I set before. Now, this value is silly. Let's just delete this and remake it with a better setting. So what I want to do is keep the multiply amount at 0.1 and the mix is going to be 0 by default. Now I'm going to rename these to amount and multiplier. And that's it. I'm just going to export this to my Documents Mari Gizmos folder, and then on the next launch of Mari, it shows up in our tab menu. And boom, that's pretty cool. But before you go, I've got some quick bonus material. As a little aside, I created this Warp 3D version as well. It's exactly the same as the 2D version, except it uses a position node instead of UV. This is one of my favorite ways to mix noises together. To show you what I mean, I put together this little node stream. I've got a nice soft purlin noise, and I've used levels to crush the values to get these little spots everywhere. If I connect up a cloud node, I can use the roughness and jaggediness of it to push around the purlin, and with it crushed like this, it gives a really, really nice fringed edge look around these little spots here, which can create an awesome mask for you. All right, that's all for now. Hopefully that was helpful to you. Please let me know if you've got any questions or anything else in the comment section below. And as always, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.